All right, let's get into some football now. Johnny Mack is in the house here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as we take a look at the Eagles OTAs. Next week is the mandatory OTAs. They will be hosting before there's a little lull in the football.
Never.
He joins us now.
Never. There's always news.
There is, and I find this story to be interesting, John, that a Hall of Fame voter has said he would have snubbed T.O. if he'd known he would have shown up. And that statement right there, isn't that part of the issue with the whole format?
I don't agree with that. I think there's a lot of issues with Hall of Fame voters. I think even baseball's worse, far worse than football. But there's always been a political aspect to it. Some people who have criticized them for not electing T.O. earlier have mentioned that, and this kind of plays into that narrative because it shouldn't be about, and I'm not defending Terrell Owens. I think he should show up to his induction ceremony, but whether he does or not should have no bearing on whether he's a Hall of Fame player or not.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is you shouldn't be taking – number one, he should have made it on his first opportunity. The fact that people didn't vote for him for personal reasons shows that there's a problem right there, right?
Yeah, I think if people excluded him strictly for those types of reasons, personal reasons, yeah, I think they're wrong. I never looked at him as a slam dunk first ballot Hall of Famer. Now, I kind of play both sides of the fence there because on one hand, I say to myself, you're either a Hall of Famer or not, and everybody should be in the first ballot or no ballot at all. In other words, you're not adding to your legacy by waiting. But on the other hand, if you look at the history of how they do things, I don't think he should have been a first ballot Hall of Famer. I do think he's worthy of going in, but I think people that haggle over things like that kind of don't understand the way that things have been done, and whether sort of those unwritten rules about which they broke this year by putting in two receivers at one time. To be honest, I didn't think T.O. would go in this year because Randy Moss was up, and I knew he was going in. So it was a little bit of a surprise that he went in this year, but ultimately he was always going into the Hall of Fame. But, yeah, I don't agree with anyone who's saying I'm not going to let him in because he doesn't show up for a speech.
So apparently he's going to he's going to announce what he's going to do. What is the grand TO? Like, what would be perfect TO? Like, in the park?
Sit-ups.
I think he should do it right.
Sit-ups. Gotta be.
He's got to be in the park. Yeah, he's got to be in the driveway.
In his driveway.
Wouldn't that be classic if he was in the driveway doing sit-ups and making a speech?
Yeah, and I think Drew Rosenhaus should be there, and I think reporters should start hurling questions, and Drew can say next question, and I think T.O. can do sit-ups and have the circus they want. Yeah, ultimately, I think he may eventually change his mind and show up because none of this makes any sense. But we'll see how it shakes out. If he doesn't go, he's going to be missing out on one of the great days of his life and being honored there amongst all those, not only peers, but all the football fans, all the people in this industry that show up. It's a pretty cool thing, and I have no idea why he wouldn't want to be involved with it.
Now, John, the OTAs coming to a close, and then next week is the mandatory version. What were some of the highlights of this week in the first couple of weeks of the OTAs before they get to the mandatory stuff? What are some of the things that, I don't want to say that you learned, but were some observations that stood out?
Well, I tend to look towards the younger players, as I kind of mentioned yesterday on the show, and see if guys are ready to take that step forward. And I think the biggest name from that perspective we mentioned before is probably Devontae Ballsby, the quarterback. I think there's also been significant steps taken by some of the second-year players. There always are. Because if you think about it, that rookie season, it's so difficult people kind of just forget that, these are kids generally leaving their homes, moving to a different city, a different environment, in many cases, completely different culture from a different part of the country. You have to meet new people. You have to ingratiate yourself. You have to learn an offense. You have to learn a defense, depending on which side of the ball you're on. There's a lot of stuff thrown at those kids, and that's why NFL coaches will tell you consistently that the most improvement you generally see in players is from their first to second year. So that's the wheelhouse of guys like Rasul Douglas, who I just wrote about today on 973ESPN.com. Shelton Gibson, we mentioned yesterday. Hopefully Donnell Pumphrey can make a little bounce back and make this football team. So players like that, it's really important for.
John, let's get into Rasul Douglas, because I read your article on him, and you talk about year one to year two, and you used the phrase in your article, he got thrown into the deep end of the pool. I mean, he was, when Ronald Darby went down, boom, he was right in action and seeing significant playing time. And how do you think he fared in his rookie season, and where do you think the growth potential is for him in year two?
Yeah, I mean, he really did. I mean, if you think about it, last year, he was not even dressed for week one. And Darby gets hurt, and all of a sudden he's a starting cornerback in the NFL, and played about 75% of the snaps against Kansas City. And then the 2 weeks after, he played every play, 100%. So he really got thrown in, and he wasn't ready. I think everybody knew it, but he fought, and he struggled through it. There were some bad points, but there were some good ones. And I think that's what Jim Schwartz looks as a positive. It's what he loves about Jalen Mills is the fact that they're so competitive. They have short memories, which you need as a cornerback in this league, because you're going to get beat, and you can't sulk about it. You got to immediately jump back into it and play the next play. I think Rasul has a lot of that as well. And then the thing the Eagles have been talking about since the day they drafted him, and the bottom line is he's got rare size for a cornerback. And that's, when you think about all the lengthy receivers in this league now, everybody wants that 6'2" corner with the long arms, and that's what Rasul brings to the table.
Yeah, 6'2", and I thought, John, like, one of the things you could see, he was raw, but his open field tackling, or in the vertical NFL now, or even the NFL, where instead of a 2 or 3 yard run, they'll take the screen pass right down the line of scrimmage and then expect that guy, once you catch it, to make a play. And it's Rasul one-on-one, like, you either bring him down or you're getting beat. I thought those were the things he did right. What about the fact that they may try to move him into the safety position? Has he talked about that? Is he comfortable with that? Is that somewhere ultimately you think he could be?
Yeah, I think at some point the Eagles might entertain it, but I talked to Rasul yesterday, and they haven't practiced him at all at safety yet. So it's not on the table. But just from his size and his skill set, if you look at him as a player, probably the biggest weakness is speed, and that would translate to potentially moving inside for somebody that big and that physical. But that's all potential at this point. The Eagles, as I said, they have not tried him at that particular position yet. It's not to say they won't. Jim Schwartz kind of intimated at some point they may take a look at him there, but it hasn't happened yet. And we're done OTAs now. So it's not going to happen at minicamp. That's pretty clear. And if it doesn't happen at minicamp, it's probably not going to happen at training camp. So that might be for year 3 or somewhere even further down the line.
If it's not Rasul Douglas in that Corey Graham role that you wrote about, who would fit into that third safety kind of role?
Well, ultimately, I think it's going to be Corey Graham, I think. Same thing has happened last year. I mean, Corey is not retired. You really haven't heard a blip from him. And he's one of those veteran guys that really doesn't need OTAs. The Eagles didn't have any money for him. Now they do, after sort of getting that relief from the Michael Kendricks thing. And we'll see. Ultimately, I think they're going to try to see, can they get younger? Can they get cheaper? And if one of the younger players, whether it's Trey Sullivan, Jeremy Reeves, but I can't picture Jim Schwartz being comfortable with a young player at that position. That was his big thing last year. One of the reasons he was comfortable moving Malcolm Jenkins all over the formation is because he trusted Corey Graham not to blow assignments. I don't know if he could ever trust a young player to be at that level as far as understanding his defense. So ultimately, I think Corey Graham's going to be in the Corey Graham role. But of the people actually on the team right now, Trey Sullivan probably is the leader in the clubhouse, and Jeremy Reeves would be number two, and that's a guy who's got experience on the practice squad and an undrafted rookie. So that's a position that could be a problem.
You figure when they parted ways with Corey Graham, they said, listen, we have your number, stay close. If we're able to make it work, one of those kind of things, like never burn the bridge, never say goodbye for good.
Yeah, completely. And I think Corey realizes it as well. I mean, he won a Super Bowl. He probably, he won one in the past. He probably doesn't want to go anywhere else. So it's either going to be Philadelphia for him or nothing. And if training camp rolls around and there's still issues, I think he's going to be getting that call.
You just touched on something about Jim Schwartz and his level of trust with young players. Is there a young player that you saw during OTAs on the defensive side of the ball that you'd lean towards saying, well, maybe he doesn't trust him yet, but he's putting him out there a lot, so that could be a guy that is like the next young guy to then earn Schwartz's trust?
Well, I think Ballsby's that guy. I mean, all the young players, that's the thing, in OTAs, and Jim will say, I mean, that's the time for teaching, and training camp is for evaluation. So he's throwing all the young guys out there. But if you're asking me the one guy he potentially could be in the mix when the real stuff starts, that would be Ballsby. There's a lot of guys with potential. And you have to look at certain positions. Josh Sweat, for example. I mean, the Eagles are extraordinarily deep at defensive end once Michael Bennett gets here, once Brandon gets healthy. But I think the Eagles look at the future and think he could be a really, really good pass rusher in this league. And that's a position where you can play as a young guy because it is, pinning your ears back and go getting the quarterback isn't quite the cerebral role as being, a center fielder, as a safety on defense, which Corey Graham did at times. So a lot of it depends on position.
Which is interesting too, John, because you mentioned is he going to want to go with a young guy in the secondary, and you would think that position with Mills and Darby and Sidney Jones and Rasul Douglas, that it would be ultra competitive to be a younger unknown guy to even work your way onto the field. Yeah,
I mean, the Eagles have some pretty good depth at the cornerback position. And that's, even without Darryl Worley, who they expected to be here. And that's a good thing. But the issue, if there is one, and we've talked about it before, is most of them look like they're outside corners, and not a lot of them look like a traditional slot cornerback. So you sort of have a ton of people to play outside, and they're trying to figure out who can play inside. And I think that's a work in progress. They've been rotating bodies in and out throughout the OTAs, and I think that'll continue not only at minicamp, but throughout at least the first couple of weeks of training camp.
Yeah, I think the OTAs next week with the mandatories there should be pretty interesting to watch that. Because I'm interested to see, because Peterson's going to speak every day except for Monday, I guess, next week, and that'll be Schwartz and Groh. But to see once everybody's there, and everybody's already there in the secondary too, it's not like people are missing, but to see how they use Darby and Sidney Jones. I think Sidney Jones is certainly the guy that everybody's got the most interest in, but to see how they're used once the OTAs, because that'll be the last time that the coaching staff really gets to see these guys in action until, July?
Yeah, and that's sort of the end of the teaching portion. And then when you do get to training camp, it turns into evaluation, and that's where guys start competing for roster spots. Now, certain guys are going to make the team. Sydney's certainly going to make the team. Rasul's certainly going to make the team. So the issue becomes, where are they going to play? Are they going to have a role in the defense, or are they going to be reserve players? And that's to be determined.
Real quick on the offensive side of the ball, Shelton Gibson, he was a draft pick last year. What is his opportunity to make this team? Is he a long shot?
No, I wouldn't say he's a long shot, but I would say he's a bubble guy. I think similar to last year. I mean, you have 4 kind of guys penciled in at that wide receiver position, and you're probably going to only keep 5, and Shelton would be in the mix for that 5th spot. What helps him a lot is he's a good special teams player, and you need to be. If you're going to be that 5th receiver, you have to contribute on special teams, whereas a guy like Marcus Wheaton, if he's healthy, he's probably a better receiver, but he's not going to help you on special teams. So that's where you sort of have to weigh your roster decisions and see who's more meaningful. So if it looks like, Marcus might be a little bit better than Shelton at receiver, Shelton will probably make the team because he can help more on special teams.
All right, plenty more on the Eagles, of course, next week when their mandatory OTAs begin, and we will dive into that with Johnny Mack right here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Thanks, pal. Have enjoy the weekend.
You too, guys. Thank you.